All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is our August monthly webinar. This is the monthly CISMA webinar that we host. These webinars are coordinated, organized, and hosted by the Florida Invasive Species Council's Partnership Assistance and Communications Committee. That's FISPAC for short, if you're seeing that acronym on our emails. And I'm just going to remind you that these recordings, that these talks are recorded and that you can watch them on our YouTube channel, which is the invite to that link, or I should say the link to the YouTube channel is in the email invites that you received. Today we have Dr. Brett Bultemeier here to talk about some of the ongoing changes with the way that the EPA is regulating herbicides. To my understanding that these changes include some changes to the labels, and we know that the labels are the law. So this is a pretty important topic for a lot of us who work in this field. And I want to thank you, Dr. Bultemeier, for coming here to talk to us about this. Just a quick note, I'm going to ask that everyone stays muted, please. If you have any questions, you can either hold on to them to the end, or we'll do a quick little question round, or you can drop them in the chat as we're going, and then I can read them off at the end. And with that, I will pass it to you, Dr. Bultemeier.
All right. Can you hear me? Am I still coming through?
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're all good.
And did my screen come up?
Yes.
Perfecto. We will get started so that I keep us plenty on time, because there are definitely some changes that I want to get to, some of which will not have a huge impact on you in the natural area world yet. And that's maybe an important way to couch this, is yet being the key phrase here. But there are definitely some changes that are very likely to hit in the pesticide world that you work in. Give me just a second. I'm having trouble with my PowerPoint. We're going to stop the slideshow and start it again. It all disappeared on me. So we'll just start that again. Shame on me for not having that fully ready.
That's okay.
It's one of those, I went to advance the slide and it's like, oh, you didn't click on the minimized slideshow. And so it was disappeared. It disappeared.
No problem.
So we'll just open it back up and start from the beginning, and I'll just truncate some of the introduction. So we will dive right in. Did that come up?
Yes, it looks all good.
Perfect. All right, so let's just skip the rest of the introduction and get into the heart of the matter. What are we really talking about with the changes at EPA? So within EPA, you have FIFRA, which we're probably all very familiar with in any of the pesticide trainings that we've had, that FIFRA registers pesticides. So this is the federal act that ensures that there's testing for these pesticides, there's labeling, there's enforcement, all the things we associate with pesticide use are controlled through FIFRA. And EPA says that when you use their products according to the label, it doesn't cause unreasonable risk of harm to people or the environment. And that's important to hold on to, unreasonable risk of harm. We contrast that with the Endangered Species Act, which protects endangered species. And their mantra is no harm. And EPA has to abide by both of these laws. So EPA says, well, we're protecting people and the environment. We are accepting some level of risk. But Endangered Species Act says zero risk is our goal. And now EPA has to navigate between these two. So who is EPA's partner on this? If EPA is primarily working in the FIFRA world, they're working with the agencies. This would be U.S. Fish and Wildlife or the Marine Fishery Services. They're doing the heavy lifting on the endangered species side. So they're making sure they know where they are, what impacts could get them, and making sure that they are protected. Again, contrast EPA, minimal risk of harm to no harm for the agencies. Now, if something that FIFRA put forward could come in contact with an endangered species, the two agencies have to have a consultation. And consultation is not a simple, let's have a conversation and this is going to be a quick process. It's 2 or 3 federal agencies working together to make sure that they are both abiding by the federal law of the land. Now, the way that this was done was on a product by product, species by species basis. And from that point, EPA would sort of do the first sort. So they would do what was called a biological evaluation, where they would look at that pesticide, and the first question they would ask is, could this even come in contact with an endangered species? So let's say this product is only registered on the interior of the country. You don't have to worry about things like Pacific whales if you're only using that product in the center, right? So EPA would move those products into the will never come in contact with this species. We're done. You don't have to consider it more. As you can imagine, there's very few that likely fall into that. If we take something like glyphosate that's used across the country, EPA says obviously that could come in contact with a wide range of endangered species. Then they further sort it into yes, it will come in contact, but our science says it won't have any impact on that species or their habitat. That moves into the agencies don't need to consider it. Most of the pesticides fall somewhere in it could have some impact on an individual. It's not likely to hurt all of them, all the way to EPA saying we feel like this pesticide absolutely could do detrimental harm to an individual or its habitat. From there, the agencies will take those that information, do further analysis, and figure out what changes might need to be made if harm could occur. And then they come out with an opinion. And this, all of this process has public comment periods. They have to respond to these comments. It's a very long process. And at the end, what you would come up with is some sort of guidance that took you away from what the label originally intended. So this could be you can't use this product full stop. Yes, the agencies have the ability to give their opinion that a product should be deregistered. More often, it was limited spray in these locations or during this time. That something changed into how that product was used. Now, the issue was you can imagine if you're doing this product by product, species by species, if we start doing the math on how many registered products and how many species, it's a matrix that gets very big very quick. And what happened is the initial registration for a lot of our products didn't adequately consider endangered species. If we go back to the foundation, FIFRA says not an unreasonable risk of harm, endangered species says no harm. So that the initial products didn't consider that, EPA started getting pushback. They began to work through a little bit faster, but fell way, way behind. These numbers are actually outdated at this point. EPA was so far behind, it was clear there was not a world in which they could ever catch ahead. I know I feel that more and more every day of being behind and feeling like you'll never catch up. To add more to that, EPA got sued and sued by so many groups that it became a mega lawsuit that they then had to settle. And regardless of what we hear about courts in this country being in one political camp or another, courts across this country from both political spectrums, if you feel that way, absolutely told EPA you're not in compliance, you have no plan to get in compliance, that is unacceptable, you must come up with something. So what they were doing was unsustainable, and they had to change how they were looking at pesticides as it relates to endangered species. So they had to come up with the Endangered Species Act work plan. Now, I'm not going to get into all of these details, but what they're trying to do with this is make much broader, faster decisions that don't go product by product, species by species, but do indeed fit within the Endangered Species Act requirements. So the first thing is obvious. When we're registering a product or re-registering a product, we will start making decisions at that stage related to endangered species. Then they start looking at drift and erosion control. And this is where we're going to spend a bulk of our time when we start talking about the use of pesticides, because the recognition is, particularly if we're looking at agriculture, if you keep the product where you intend to spray it, the threat to endangered species is either none or so negligible that it's not a concern. You know, endangered species are not utilizing a farm as habitat because it is very, very poor habitat. Now, that doesn't mean that every single species wouldn't potentially come in contact with a farm. But again, if we think about we keep a product on the farm, we've made a huge impact on not having it come in contact with endangered species. Now, there's going to be instances where that could change. Think of a monarch butterfly going through a farm field. How do we start to address some of these situations that are outside of this broad statement? We'll get into what that BLT2 stands for. And then finally, can we change how we look at species? So if we put in something in place that protects one pollinator, can we then make sure that we are protecting all pollinators? Are there decisions we can make that across taxa would work? So this is sort of their pathway out of the bind that they were in and leads to the changes that we'll talk about here in the future. Now, it's important to remember why we're doing this. I know when I talk to a lot of my agricultural folks, they get a little bit pushback and they're going, we're not hurting endangered species. But we have to remember why the Endangered Species Act was put in place in the first place. And we have to look no further than the state of Florida, that the American alligator was absolutely an imperiled species. Those of us that work in natural areas and aquatics would say, I don't think they're imperiled anymore. There are plenty of them, but there was a world in which the greatest mascot in the entire world for the greatest university in the world, yes, I am biased, could have been eliminated. Now, those of you that are fans of other schools, one, I'm sorry. But two, if the American alligator doesn't do it for you, maybe the bald eagle does. And this is actually a case where we can see a direct impact of limiting chemicals in the environment helped in the recovery of this species. We all know with endangered species, there's lots of things like habitat and tons of other things that we can do, but let's not pretend like keeping our eye on chemicals doesn't make a difference. Now, if you're going, I don't really care about charismatic megafauna. They're just, attention seeking animals. Who gives a rip? Well, there's a ton of plants on that endangered species list. And some of these plants are critical for cancer research and a host of other things. Plus, let's be real, protecting the environment is something that's worthwhile to do because we all enjoy being out in nature. And if we're going to not have our eye focused on protecting species, what's the point of any of this in the first place? Now, this all sounds really complicated. We're talking about drift and erosion control and all of these different things. How is EPA going to get all of this new information out? And the problem is they're a little bit bound. There is only one way that the EPA can communicate, and that is through the label. And this is the part where if you were all in front of me in an audience, I would say the label is the, and you all repeat law. Oh, there it is. That just fills me with joy. And it makes sure that those that monitor I'm doing my job, there's my checkbox. I made people say the label is the law. We can move on. The problem with that is it's true. The label is the law. It's what we must follow. But where are you going to fit all of this information? In a couple of paragraphs in the environmental hazards? We've seen some of these labels that are thick, but if we're going to put in place all of the endangered species and all of the language to deal with that, your pesticide label is now War and Peace, and it's thicker than the pesticide jug that the label's on. That's not tenable. So something else must be done. The label alone can't handle all of this complexity. And we are getting the very first example of some of the changes that EPA has made coming out onto labels. And we actually only have one label that starts to address this, and it is Liberty Ultra, which is a crop-specific product. We are going to see these changes on agriculture first. So a lot of what I'm going to quickly review, you're going to be saying, this will never impact us in natural area. And you're right, to the point where EPA has said, originally they said it would be agriculture only. We all knew that that was not true. There was no way that was going to be true. But they are primarily starting with agriculture because it has the biggest impact. And what we're seeing as we move through the label is somewhat new wording on sections of a label. So here's a first example, mandatory runoff mitigation. And we can see there's a whole bunch of words here that are telling us what to do. But the key point is we have two very important do nots here. And some of these are language that you might start seeing on your label. Do not apply when soils are saturated or above field capacity, and do not apply during rain. That would absolutely have impact on those of you in invasive species management. There was even proposed language that some labels might have that would say, do not apply when rain is forecast for the next 48 to 72 hours, which in South Florida is all year round pretty much. So This is important to pay attention to because if it does come to those labels, you need to be ready to have a counter response to EPA. They are open to listening. The biggest change is this language directly below that says you must get 3 points in order to use this label. That is brand new. Never before have you purchased a product and then been told you couldn't use it because of something necessarily on that product. So now it's not just buy the product, follow the label. It's buy the product, follow the label, and get these 3 points. And where this is important is it doesn't tell you on the label itself what those points are and where to get them. It directs you to a website, the mitigation menu, which we are actually going to take a look at right now. So let me pull that website up. And what the mitigation menu walks you through is a whole bunch of information about what this is, what all of these points are. It gives you information about you might be exempt, and these are the circumstances in which you are exempt. And then it gives you lots of definitions. Anywhere that you see a blue will take you to a much more fleshed out version of what it's telling you. So I tell all of my growers and folks that are using this, after you've gone to the mitigation menu, read through this the first time, and then you can move forward. Ultimately, what people are going to get to on the ag side is they're going to get to a record keeping sheet. That can either be as an Excel spreadsheet, or for our purposes here, we're going to actually run through the app. Now, this does not currently apply to natural areas, and I will say I do not anticipate it ever applying to natural areas. You can't do some of the things that it talks about. But to give you an idea what farmers may go through, they have to fill out information about where they're treating, and then they're asking or answering questions about their field. Do you have a berm? Do you have return irrigation? Are you part of a conservation program? And then from there, it's asking how many points do you need? And then they have to go through this decision matrix until they get those 3 points. Now, for a lot of farmers, it's pretty easy because they can get points just by being a farmer in Florida and growing in some of our counties. So you can see there's 2 points, 3 points. So just a farmer in Broward County, by the virtue of where they live, they have met their 3 points. Normally, I would walk through a whole lot more scenarios. What I want to give you an idea is none of these could ever apply to natural areas. You don't do conservation tillage. You're not doing terrace farming. You're not using erosion barriers. You're not doing these sorts of things. So this isn't going to apply to you. What might apply to you is the runoff and spray drift. So with the insecticide strategy coming in and even a little bit the herbicide, what we're seeing is much larger buffers between certain sensitive areas. And that many of you work in upland and aquatic, and that in between, I very much could see an upland specific label having things like 350 feet or 500-foot barrier between where you're spraying and water. So think about the vague language that we've had on labels now where it says don't spray over the water or where there's really high water. This may get real specific where it will give you a large buffer. So here we're walking through, it's asking, do you have a buffer? Yes. Does it tell you that you can reduce that buffer? Absolutely. So this is where you would start filling in. We would be a ground boom application. And now you're asking, do any of these things apply? Are you treating less than 1/10 of an acre? Probably not. Are you treating in any of these areas? It's basically, are you treating in an area where there's nothing sensitive nearby? If we're thinking by our sort of in between, you're treating in a mangrove swamp, you're treating near an irrigation canal, none of that applies. So what you're going to do is put in your buffer. So let's say it's 350 feet. And now we start answering questions. Well, let's say we don't need fine or medium. We can do, the label tells me we can do medium, but we're actually going to do coarse. My spray drift buffer, just by changing what nozzles I'm using and the type of spray, went from 350 feet to 15-foot buffer. Now we can start to use that product. And then as we continue on, there's other questions like, are you using less than max label rate? This is another area where oftentimes we will use less than max label rate. Now, in this instance, it may not drop us to zero, but it could. I don't want to spend a ton of time here because this is still kind of an unknown, but I want you to maybe be a little familiar with it, start thinking about your operations, and maybe go to the EPA mitigation menu. If you just type that into Google, it'll take you there, and start playing through this app to see if you could reduce your buffer should you get one in the future. So as a reminder, you would go to the EPA mitigation menu. You're going to scroll down until you hit either the runoff erosion mitigation options, or if you come down here to where it says drift, and then you're going to see what they call the mobile friendly pesticide app. Works great on a phone or like I'm using here. And at the end of that, it ultimately gives you a record that you could print or save to show that you were doing these sorts of things. All right, let's go back to the presentation. All right. Oh, I got to shrink this down. So all of this is related to the herbicide strategy. And what the herbicide strategy was saying as part of EPA getting back into compliance is if we can make broad decisions for herbicides that will bring all herbicides into compliance, that's what we're going to do. And that's what you saw through the use of points, through buffers, through all of those sorts of things. So these will start universally showing up on herbicide labels pretty soon, starting with ag exclusive products first. And we only have that one product so far. It's Liberty Ultra, but the expectation is this year there should be 30 more products that come along, and I would anticipate even more than next year. What I think we're going to see is products that are getting re-registration will have this. I don't anticipate a bunch of brand new products, but I see a whole bunch of companies voluntarily adding this to their label. And you may be saying, why would a company voluntarily put more work into redoing a label and educating their customers? Well, it's because if they do that, they'll get a faster track to registering new things in the future. It's a good way to earn some good credit with EPA. All right, so that mandatory spray drift that I was telling you about, this is where you're going to start seeing that on the labels. What's funny is Liberty Ultra doesn't actually allow you to go use that app. Everything that you need for the spray drift mitigation is here on the label itself. I don't know if Natural Area is going to do that, where you're just going to have a hard set buffer and there's only one or two things that you can do to get around it, or if they will allow you to use the app. I know my preference, and I think your preference would be let us use the app, please, because that is infinitely more flexible and more changeable in the future. All right, now we're not done yet. So if we look in that mandatory runoff mitigation, we will see something called Bulletins Live 2 and a website. So this is now the third place that we've seen a website, which means that websites count as label. So if the label is the law, a website on the label is also now law. This is not something that you can go to if you want. It's not something to cruise around if you're feeling like, oh, let's go get some more information. This is just as enforceable as the label. And if you walk away with nothing else from this talk, other than the University of Florida and the Gators are the best in the whole world, it's that websites are coming to labels, and it isn't going to stop at the things I'm showing you here today. Mark my words, at some point here in the future, your entire label will be on a website. The days of that label being on the jug will come to an end at some point. So I would highly encourage you to start thinking through what that might be and how that would fit into your operations. Now, the part that will absolutely show up on natural area labels at some point here in the future is this. And normally I would ask, has anybody seen these pink maps? And most people say no. Well, we have them here in Florida. They have them in Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama. Is this an SEC football map? No, it's not, because they have them in California as well. And this is a PULA, which is hosted inside the BLT. And I promise you, we are done using acronyms. I am going to define these. So a PULA is a pesticide use limitation area. That means if you're in one of these pink spots, you can't use the pesticide like you normally would. You have to do something else. So it is bound by a map. So you are space-based, but it is also time-based. You can time travel when you are using a PULA. You are allowed to go 6 months into the future and live in that regulatory environment for the next 6 months. This was really, really important, a feature that the farmers requested because they were saying, you can't have me purchase all my chemical for the growing season, and then the day before I treat, change things, and I can't now use that product. So EPA said that is very reasonable. You can go 6 months forward, figure out where all of the lines are, and base everything off of that. You can't go further than 6 months, but you can go up to 6 months. Now, you can wait till the day before a treatment, and you're perfectly fine. So what you have is various language on labels because bulletins is not new. Bulletins has actually existed for some time. So what we have in the wild is some labels where this is listed as a simple website that doesn't exist anymore. So if you actually tried to follow the label and go to the website, it wouldn't take you to the right place. So if your label says to visit a bulletin or to look up a bulletin, just Google Bulletins Live 2 and it'll take you where you need to go. Now, you may find it in the directions for use. You may find it in the environmental hazards. You may find it in its own section called endangered species protection. The point is, wherever you find it, you must now go to that website. And this is what that website looks like. And from here, you're not going to do what everybody wants to do and scroll into the pretty pink areas and click around. What you're going to do is put in the month that you're doing your treatment and your EPA registration number so that you are only looking up your product. And the reason for that, if I were to click the pink in this area in the Pacific Northwest, it's like a 300-page report with something like 70 or 80 different pesticides. That's an unusable thing. Versus if I put my EPA registration number and zoom in, it will show me what I need to know. All right, so what does it look like? So in this case, I would go to that Bulletins Live 2. I would put in my EPA registration number. I would say my farm is in this area. Boy, I'd better print a record because it looks like if that map moved, I would be in that pink area. And then it's going to give you some extra information. So at the end of the day, if I am in this pink area and I'm using one of these products, I have to follow one of these two, depending on where I'm using it, restrictions. So this is with setbacks, and it is a time-based restriction. Some of those, we have one that's here, if anybody can recognize that shape. That is the entirety of Palm Beach County. And the product that we looked up for this is a flat out do not use. You cannot use that product in the entirety of Palm Beach County, full stop. So bulletins can be additional rate reductions. A bulletin can tell you not to combine it with another pesticide. A bulletin can tell you you can't use it at all. And the point is, once you have your map, your location, on that Bulletins Live 2 here in the upper right, if you have clicked in your area, it will give you a green bulletin. You would then print that bulletin, and it shows that you must follow this, and then you would follow the restrictions that it gives you. We'll actually skip this video because we might be able to get into Bulletins Live 2. So let's take a look at Bulletins Live 2 and what that may look like. So I'm going to do exactly what I told you not to do. I'm going to click the pretty pink area. And the pretty pink area gives me a somewhat shorter list of products, but you get the idea that I maybe don't want to scroll through all of those. I would take my EPA registration number associated with my label that told me I had to come here and then do that. So let's say I had one of these products. I'm farming right in here. I click printable bulletin, and now it's going to pull that bulletin up. It's going to download, and then I can either save that as a digital file or print it for my records. And it's showing that in August, when I checked, I was in that PULA, and I am going to follow one of these restrictions, which is I can't apply before dawn or dusk, so on and so forth. Keep that, prove that I abided by that, and we were good to go. Now, some of these are going to be really important to pay attention to because there is a PULA that extends all the way around the coast of Florida, from the Atlantic all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, all the way around, that tells us that we can't do a treatment. Let's just click down here in Miami and see what this restriction is. So this restriction would be for a host of products, one of which is used in mosquito control. And it tells us that we cannot spray, if they haven't changed it, that you cannot spray from like April to September for mosquitoes in the state of Florida in that area. It actually looks like they have made some changes, which is the point that I wanted to make. Can you imagine in Miami from April to September not doing mosquito control? Or excuse me, from September through April. Either way, it doesn't matter. Yeah, we want to do mosquito control here. So mosquito control got with EPA, said this is not going to be tenable, and EPA made changes. So can I tell you what all the bulletins are? No. Liberty Ultra, which actually has that bulletins language on it, says you've got to go check for a bulletin. There are no bulletins. So it's a bit of a Schrodinger's bulletin. I don't know if a bulletin exists or not, but it tells me that EPA recognizes that they need to put this language on a label so that if they create one in the future, they have the ability to say you need to abide by it. And that is where I think you will start seeing companies maybe even voluntarily putting that on their label. So you might start seeing that on your products, meaning you have to check if there's a bulletin, even if there isn't. And then you have to prove that I checked and there wasn't. Because if you go to do a treatment and all of a sudden there is one, you could find yourself in some trouble. All right, so in the future with these bulletins, how do I know what I'm supposed to do? What does this process look like? Well, if you have a label that doesn't have any language about a bulletin, like most of your labels do now, the label is all you need. If your label has none of the websites and nothing else listed, just use that product exactly like you have been. If your label does have this language, now I have to check my bulletin. I grab my EPA registration number, I plug it into that bulletin's live 2, and I check. And in this instance, I was looking to do a treatment in April. I put in my EPA registration number down here. I am in this area right here, which is close to a PULA, but not in one. I would then either screen capture or print that showing that there were no limitations in my area. I was good to go. So follow the label, keep the proof that you checked, move on with your happy day. All right, let's go the full way the other way. My label has bulletins language. I grab my EPA registration number. I go to check bulletins, and my farm is right here. I am in pink. I must now print that bulletin where it turns green, and then I have to abide by whatever instructions are on here in addition to what's on the label. Keep proof that I was able to abide by that and this bulletin. And if you do that, you will be in compliance. So what is the process going to be, particularly for our farmers? And then I'll highlight where you all come in. One, follow the label. That doesn't change. The label is the law. You have to follow everything that's on the label, which means you have to check, are there mitigation points? Can I meet those? If not, you can't use that product, or you must make changes so that you can meet those points. Once you have enough points to use that product, this is primarily ag, check the buffer. This is where you all might come in. You may have ecological buffers. Do I have one? Is it going to make it impossible to do my treatment? Do I need to reduce it? Can I reduce it? Once you've done that, check for bulletins language. If you don't have bulletins language, use the product, you're good to go. If you do have bulletins language, are you in the PULA? No. Keep proof that you weren't. If you are in the PULA, print it, follow the rules that it tells you you have to follow. All right, so how will we comply with pesticides in the future? You got to follow a label. You got to go to 4 to 5 different websites that all count as label. There's lots more math and boxes to check, but at the end of the day, as worried as a lot of farmers were, and even some of us on the regulatory side about what all of these changes were going to mean, EPA really did a good job of capturing that their registration process is super robust. Their labels were protecting endangered species. Now you're just keeping extra records to show that you are. And in a handful of pretty risky places and areas, you've got to put a few reasonable things in place to protect endangered species. So this will start with agriculture. So ag is first because it gets them into compliance with the most. But I have heard them say that their anticipation is all non-residential products will have some responsibility when it comes to endangered species. Now, I don't see the mitigation points entering anywhere outside of maybe golf courses, because if we think of a golf course, it's kind of like a farm field in some ways. There are some things they could do that they would pull in. But I think for groups like you, it's going to be those offsets, reducing that buffer, and then bulletins. I think there is no doubt that bulletins will enter the aquatic and natural area world. We are just working in areas that are way too close to endangered species to be ignored. But one of the things to start thinking about is your work in aquatics and in natural area is providing an ecological service. In fact, in some places, you're controlling an invasive species directly protects an endangered species. Start thinking about that, organizing like you are through groups like this, because when EPA starts adding these things to your labels, you want to be ready. When mosquito control and ag and all of these other groups have had conversations with EPA, it has allowed for change. And here's the upside of a website being a place that you're getting information about the label. It is so much easier to change. So if all we have is the label, this printed thing that's on a jug, we're not going to see changes very often. Now that we're starting to lean on websites, it means we can dial these products in from both sides. Those that have environmental concerns about these products that are science-based and reasonable, hey, we're going to draw some more boundaries. If EPA draws too far that now, hey, we can't protect snail kites because we can't control water hyacinth that's pushing into their breeding habitat, oh, we overcorrected, they can shift back. And that won't take years and years and years to do. So what additional changes are coming? All of this, the mitigation points, the buffer, bulletins live 2, came with the herbicide strategy, which is final and showing up on labels as we speak. The insecticide strategy was just finalized, I believe, at the beginning of this year. Anticipate seeing that language on products probably in the next year. And then there's also the rodenticide strategy, fungicide strategy, and then figuring out how to do the vulnerable species. I would argue everything at the bottom of that you can throw out. We have no idea. Given the regulatory environment we're in, given the cuts at EPA, and just where things sit, I would anticipate we won't see a bunch of new things come through. But on herbicide and insecticide, the horse is out of the barn. They're not going to put that one back. I think any new products that get registered are going to have to address those changes. So what do you need to do? I would say your big responsibility is to Google Bulletins Live 2. Start playing in that system. Yes, do what I told you not to do. Click the pretty pink picture and start to see what these bulletins may look like, how you would incorporate that into operations. When would you check bulletins? How far out would you go? How would you store those records? And then just keep looking at your products. I tell people all the time, anytime you get new product in, take a look at that label, read that label before you purchase, when it comes in, and before you use it. If you want to stay up to date with changes, you can check our office's website. We do have a blog. I've been rather quiet on that blog of late because we went from a team of like 4 to me. So the blog has been left behind. But we do put out things like CEU sales, EPA updates like this. It's a decent place to get information. Don't panic and just stay familiar with Bulletins Live 2. And I'm pretty sure I stayed pretty much right on time and would have time for a few questions if there were any.
Yeah, you came in a little bit early actually, which is totally fine. Um, We do have a couple of questions popping up in the chat here. The first of which, is there a defined time to maintain records of having reviewed a bulletin?
So here's the unwritten secret within EPA. There is actually no record keeping requirement for these at all, other than it tells you you must prove that you checked. So this is going to come down to the state. My recommendation to everybody, does anybody know how long you're supposed to keep records of restricted use products? How long are you supposed to keep your records for everything else? 2 years. It would be my recommendation that at a minimum you keep these for 2 years. I'll tell you the same thing I tell all of my professional organizations, CYA, cover your assets. So however long you think you need to be defensible that you did the right things, that's how long you keep your records.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. I have another question here. How are the boundaries of the poolas determined? Is it based on critical habitat?
So the original boundaries that were drawn for many of these bulletins was a nebulous and somewhat inexact science. It was, we think there could be endangered species here. They are very careful as to how they tell people they're making the maps for very obvious reasons. They don't want people to go, oh, the salamander that is restricting my pesticide is only found in this part. Let me go find it and kill it. So there is a little bit of secret as to how the maps are drawn, but it is based on habitat, sightings of species, where they might move into. And I actually see the next logical question, and I actually see it in the chat, is will those boundaries change? Absolutely. They will shrink, they will swell, they will move as that happens. A great example is out west. There are grizzly bears that are protected, and grizzly bears move. And if a grizzly bear moves its habitat from one side of a mountain range to the other, they have to redraw that line. And that was actually where the 6 months came from, is EPA said we need to be able to move as these endangered species move, but you guys can't be checking this every day to be making decisions for your farm.
Gotcha. So it sounds like there's, instead of like a periodic revisit that's scheduled, it's more they have the flexibility to move the pool of boundaries, but you have that 6 month kind of work
Yes.
window.
I ultimately think there will probably still be some lag that I would imagine EPA is still required to do public notice that there's a change, get public comment, answer those comments, and then make that change. But that can be pretty quick. That can be in a 3-month time span versus the years and years and years these things used to take. By it being on a website, a lot more flexibility.
Gotcha. That's all that we had in the chat. Does anybody else have any questions? You can go ahead and unmute yourself and speak up if you have a question. Anything?
Bueller.
Yeah, right. It looks like we're good. Okay, cool. So I have a couple more updates that I can run through, but thank you so much, Dr. Bultemeier, for giving us the rundown, the update.
No problem.
Sweet. So with that, let me go ahead and share my screen. Oh, come on. So I just quickly want to run through some of these updates for that. So we have some upcoming events that we want to let you know about. A handful of CISMAs have their monthly meetings, obviously, throughout the course of this month. Treasure Coast in August, and then a bunch of things in September. Central Florida and Treasure Coast, as well as Osceola CISMA. On September 5th, we also have the First Fridays of the Florida First Detector Network, which is a virtual meeting. And sort of an overlapping thing, September 16th through 19th in Nassau County, there's an in-person Master Naturalist program focusing on invasive plants. A couple of announcements as well. We have the FISPAC committee has an ongoing reporting campaign for Camphor Tree. We're asking folks to make reports for Camphor Tree. Anyone who is able to submit 3 verified reports through EdMaps before September the 30th is going to earn a special badge on their EdMaps profile, and that's the camper catcher badge that we have here. And then furthermore, the top 3 reporters are going to earn gold, silver, and bronze edition badges. So get out there and help us document where camper is located in EdMaps. We also have an invasive species management survey that's been put out through UF. We have 2 UF researchers, Luis Hussein and Mia Morales, and they're conducting a human resources and perceptions survey on like 13 iconic invasive species. So if you could please consider going ahead and filling out the survey and then also sharing it to your networks as well. You have a QR code here and then also a link that is, we can share that out. For the rest of our CISMA calls, we have 2 more scheduled for this season. September 24th, we have Smutgrass with Dr. Brent Sellers, and then on October 22nd, we have a presentation on Cuban bulrush. And then we are also looking for ideas for 2026 season webinars. So please email them to me if you have any topics that you'd like us to organize a speaker on, or you're curious about learning more about. Please do some homework and reach out to me, let me know, and we can organize stuff like that. With that, that's everything. Another final reminder that this has all been recorded and you can watch it on YouTube afterwards. And with that, hopefully we'll see you next month. Thanks so much for coming and take care.